Well, once again, let me say good morning to everyone, and welcome to UUCOD this morning. Obviously, you're seeing something different than a normal sermon. Instead of seeing me and my shiny forehead, what you're seeing is my computer screen, and that will be the case throughout the sermon this morning because it's going to be done in a slideshow format, which I hope you will enjoy, and in a few minutes you'll understand why I'm doing it this way this morning. One of the things about being laid off for the last 3 months as a result of COVID-19 is that I finally had the opportunity to attend Al Gore's Climate Reality Leadership Corps training. He's given this training to large groups of people around the world for some time now, always in a large city in a different part of the world. And it's been a bucket list item of mine to do this training for a long time. And so, because of COVID, this year's training was turned into a virtual experience. It was 9 days long, it was very vigorous. And I finally had the opportunity to actually be trained by Vice President Al Gore in his methods of presenting information about climate change. And if you've ever seen any of his movies, like An Inconvenient Truth or its sequel, you know that he's famous for this climate change slide deck. And a lot of the training was around how it is he uses that slide deck to present to audiences. So I've incorporated that into my sermon this morning, and that's why you're seeing this little sermon done online, or rather as a slideshow. One of the things that the climate movement is doing more of, and colleges and universities are doing more of, and a lot of organizations, is that at the beginning of an important talk or an important class, they take a moment to acknowledge the land that they're on. And so I'd like to do that too. My home is the Coachella Valley of California, which is famous for Palm Springs and the Salton Sea. It's the ancestral home of the Cahuilla, more commonly known as Agua Caliente and Torres Martinez tribes. My love of the outdoors came from growing up in New Jersey, the ancestral home of the Lenape, and living for 35 years in San Diego, the ancestral home of the Kumeyaay. My family also has deep roots in the land of the Seneca, which is in western upstate New York. And so I want to begin this presentation by acknowledging that I stand and have stood on the land of the Lenape and the Kumeyaay and the Seneca, and today the Cahuilla. They are the traditional owners of this land and are part of the oldest surviving continuous culture in the world. I thank them for the unearned privilege this has brought to my life, and I pay my respects to the spirits of indigenous peoples everywhere. One of the things that we were encouraged to do as a part of this climate training was think about our own climate story. That is to say, think about what it was in our own lives, what formation in our own lives made us become lovers of the environment, lovers of the natural world. And for me, it was growing up near a bird sanctuary. I grew up in a little town called Short Hills, New Jersey. We moved there in 1965 because my parents had inherited a home. I was about 5 years old, and about 2 blocks from us was this absolutely beautiful Cora Hartshorn Arboretum and Bird Sanctuary. It had been, as a piece of property, donated to the township many, many years before. And it was right on my way to school. So we would walk its paths on our way to school. We would play hide and go seek there. We would watch the seasons change there. We would see all the animals and birds that lived there. We would go sledding there in the wintertime. All of these really formative things happened in this space when I was very, very young. And it really made me appreciate the outdoor world, again, right from a very, very young age. And also, when I was younger, we used to spend summers on my aunt and uncle's farm in western upstate New York. Now, I haven't been there since I was 13 or 14 years old, and so I went online to look for some pictures, some satellite photos, and this is what I found. You can see the eastern forest, rolling hills, And the farm itself looks a lot different than it did then. It used to have a bigger barn, and there was farm equipment everywhere, and we had milk cows and pigs and calves and chickens and a huge vegetable garden. And spending all those summers there just really gave me appreciation for the earth, as well as these beautiful, beautiful forests that surrounded this property. A little bit later, as a teenager, I joined the Boy Scouts, and I spent 2 weeks over several summers, each summer, at this place. It's called Crosset Lake, and it's near Lake George, New York. This is where I learned to sail. This is where I learned how to read the water and the wind in a sailboat. This is where I learned actually how to live off the eastern woodlands. This is where I first learned a lot about indigenous people who had been here before. Again, it was a hugely formative and obviously very beautiful place to spend some time in the outdoors. I remember really being taken in by Jacques Cousteau and his TV specials and all the adventures of his ship, the Calypso. And then as I got older, I had the opportunity to go visit lots of beautiful places, and I still do, of course. This is a photograph of Denali, the old Mount McKinley that I had a chance to go around in a float plane. And that's one of, I don't know, probably 20 or 30 national parks I've had the chance to visit and photograph. The other thing I realized throughout this time is that my sense of spirituality, my own sense of what I thought divinity was, had a lot to do with how indigenous people think about the holy. And of course, that's been the experience of a lot of people in my generation. And then, of course, I found Unitarian Universalism, and right there, right up front, respect for the interdependent web of all existence. That was really important to me when I became a UU. As I've grown into adulthood, I've become a nature and landscape photographer, and that's really become how I interact with the natural world. I've stood and seen and watched things that were so stunningly beautiful that they made me cry. And I know now that those feelings come from a deep connection, not just to life, but to something that's bigger than all of us. It's that raw, magical moment of universal connection that I seek to capture in my art and in my activism. And I remember when I was young, a lot of those feelings were articulated for me through music. And one of the artists was John Denver. And one of his songs has a line, "A part of everything is here in me," that has to me always been a very, very holy thought, almost a prayer, almost a mantra. Now, one of the things that Vice President Al Gore likes to do is always start his slideshow with this picture taken on Christmas Eve in 1968, because in some ways it was the beginning of the modern environmental movement. For the first time, we got a look at what our beautiful little blue marble in space actually looked like. And it so surprised the astronauts on the Apollo mission that took this picture as they sort of rounded the moon and saw it, that you can hear the surprise in their voices.
Oh my God, look at that picture over there. There's the Earth coming up. Wow, is that pretty. Hey, don't take that, it's not scheduled. You got a color film, Jim? Hand me a roll of color, quick.
Oh man, that's great. Where is it?
Quick.
Here's another picture of the Earth, and it's taken with the sun setting behind our very, very thin atmosphere. Now, when you stand outside and look up at the sky, it looks massive, doesn't it? It looks like it goes on forever. Well, the truth is, our sky, our atmosphere is very thin. It's a very thin layer. It's a very fragile layer that surrounds our planet home. So the focus of all of his slideshows are must we change, can we change, and will we change? And so the first question I want to take a look at for a second is, must we change? Well, that seems self-evident, doesn't it? We're spewing up 152 million tons of man-made pollution into that thin shell that I just showed you in the last slide every 24 hours as if it were an open sewer. That's hard to imagine, right? Every 24 hours, 152 million tons of pollution. Now, the science of global warming is pretty straightforward. The sun hits the earth, it warms it up. A healthy atmosphere should hold some of that heat in and keep us all healthy and safe and let the rest out. Well, what's happening, obviously, is that we're putting so many greenhouse gases up into the atmosphere that we're holding more of the heat in. This is established science. It's very simple. It's not hard to understand. And what's also not hard to understand are the things that are causing it, right? We have a very good sense of all the ways that we are polluting our environment with greenhouse gases. But of course, by far and away is the burning of fossil fuels. And you can see in this slide that that really took off after World War II and has really continued to grow and grow and grow. Now, this is a hard one to grasp, right? The energy trapped by man-made global warming is now equivalent to exploding 500,000 first-generation atomic bombs every single day. Every single day. Obviously, that's an awful lot of polluting energy. And so here's what all that polluting energy is doing. When we look at average temperatures and we take, say, 1951 to 1980 as a baseline, we can see that we're having more and more times as we go from decade to decade where our average temperatures get warmer and warmer. So here's 87 to 97. You can see it shifting to the right, and we have more extremely hot deviations from the mean. Here's 98 to 2008, even more extremely hot. Here's 2009 to 2019, and look how many frequency of occurrences now are in the extremely hot range. It used to cover less than 1% of the land, and now those extremely hot events cover 22% of our landmass on the Earth. Obviously, our temperatures have continued to go up and up and up in terms of annual averages. 19 of the 20 hottest years on record have occurred since 2001. And it should come as no surprise that the hottest of all have been the last 5 years, and 2020 is on track even to exceed those numbers. Now, one of the things you're going to hear me talk about a lot is how climate change affects brown communities and black communities and indigenous communities and poor communities the most. This is a shot of a homeless man who succumbed in Boston to heat exhaustion because of increasing temperatures, and it is those sorts of folks that have the most to lose from what's happening in our climate. This is a kind of a weird shot of the Earth, but it's here to help illustrate that obviously most of the Earth's surface is water. And so a whole bunch of that heat, 93% of the extra heat trapped in our atmosphere, goes into the ocean. And so what effects does that have? Well, obviously it makes our global ocean heat content go up. And not just on the surfaces, but down in deeper areas of the ocean too. And half of this increase has occurred in the last 20 years. They set a new record in 2019. 2020 is likely to set a new record again. And the temperatures keep going up and up and up. I tell my friends in San Diego over the time, the water there gets warmer and warmer and warmer. You're going to start seeing more tropical storms and maybe even a hurricane in Southern California. Now, as temperatures increase, the oceans obviously evaporate more moisture into the sky. And of course, in junior high school, we all learned the hydrological cycle: evaporation and precipitation, and then the water returns to the sea. The problem is that that water is returning in such a massive and strong fashion that flash floods increase and mudslides increase and deterioration of beaches increases, things like that. And of course, warm water causes more and larger storms. And we have seen these year over year over year. 185 mile an hour winds, Hurricane Dorian just last year, Hurricane Michael, third strongest storm to ever hit the United States. Just a couple of months ago in India and Bangladesh in the Bay of Bengal, a huge storm struck there. This is a shot from Phoenix, Arizona a couple of years ago. We're seeing more and more of these huge downbursts, microbursts. Now, this particular picture I saw once as a video. And this rain is coming down so hard that you can actually see the water bouncing up to 10 feet in the air after it hits the ground. Even Noah's Ark has been affected by these rainstorms, these increasing rainstorms. This is in Williamstown, Kentucky, where they had a little bit of a flood. And the folks that ran this Bible-based theme park actually sued their insurance company for $1 million because the insurance company was wondering why they should have to cover the cost of a damaged ark. Now, the same heat that evaporates more water from the ocean, causing those bigger downpours and floods, also sucks moisture out of the land more quickly. And so it causes longer and deeper droughts. And all those hot years that we have also typically have more fires, right? We see the fires increasing as the temperature goes up. Here's Tucson, Arizona, just a couple of months ago. Here's the horrible Kincaid fire in California last year. Here's the Tick fire north of Los Angeles. 50,000 people were ordered to evacuate. Here's the horrible Paradise fire in 2018. 86 killed, 14,000 homes and businesses burnt to the ground. And of course, this is the Apple Fire, which was just a couple of weeks ago, right across the street from us here in the Coachella Valley on the other side of the 10. I think it got up to about 30,000 acres before it was finally contained. Now, California's getting hit hard. As I am recording this sermon, an awful lot of Northern California is on fire right now, and that's going to continue throughout this season. It's going to turn out to be one of our worst ever. The average area burned each year in California has increased by 500%. Now, one of the things that causes a lot of these fires, of course, is lightning. I know this because I used to volunteer in a fire tower up in the Cleveland National Forest, and one of the things I paid the most attention to were lightning strikes. And those strikes increase for every 1 degree of Celsius of warning. And so all of these things, whether they're extreme temperatures or droughts or fires or floods or storms or mudslides, have all increased year over year over year over year since at least 1980. Now, of course, all of that warming energy going into the ocean also starts to melt ice. And I could spend an entire lecture just talking about melting ice because, of course, it's a huge issue and is raising sea levels around the world, even as we speak. And this is one of those moments where I need to stop and say, a lot of what I'm telling you today is not ways to prevent climate change because that ship has sailed. A lot of what we have to think about now is how to mitigate it. And rising sea levels are one of those things. And if you don't believe me, all you need to do is go take a little vacation in Miami Beach, Florida.
Just where that green fence is, it's like, it's just...
Now, even with pumps operating, almost every time they have a high tide, parts of Miami Beach flood. And that's because of sea level rise. And Miami is in the highest risk in terms of assets at risk from sea level rise between now and the year 2070. New York and Newark are also on that list. Now, for years and years and years and years, the Department of Defense has been saying that climate change was a risk to national security because it will lead to food and water shortages, pandemic disease, No surprise there. Disputes over refugees, and of course, natural disasters across the globe. Now let's take a little closer look locally, right? Impacts here in our Coachella Valley. We see our valley as this absolutely beautiful place to behold, but if we look a little closer, we see this reality of hardworking folks living in poverty, and they really are disproportionately burdened by environmental challenges. These are folks out in Coachella. This picture was just taken a couple of weeks ago. The grape harvest is going on. You can see socially distanced cots in a shelter. And as we all know, the numbers of COVID-19 out in our East Valley are astronomically higher than the rest of the valley. One of the problems, of course, is that the cities here in the Coachella Valley aren't taking climate change too seriously. The last time most of them even looked at a climate action plan was 2013. And all of these communities that you see here essentially were using the same draft, the same report, the same template that they built in 2013, and then they moved on. Indio, it turns out, is the only city here in our valley that has been taking this really seriously. Now, there's been some good things going on. I'm going to talk about those in a second. And then, of course, there's the Salton Sea. This is a place that I have come to fall completely in love with. It's this beautiful, beautiful place that, in contrast, is also a slow-moving, catastrophic environmental emergency, not just for the Coachella Valley, but if the wind's blowing right, all the way to Los Angeles. The numbers of things like asthma rates out in the east part of our valley are very high. Again, I'm going to talk about more of that in a second. Now let's come over to our western part of the Coachella Valley. It's beautiful, isn't it? That's why so many of us live here. Except we also have a little problem with our air. Our air is extremely polluted. There's talk of Palm Springs being named one of the smoggiest spots in the United States. And our smog is really garden variety. It's ozone and it's particulate matter. We know exactly what causes this kind of air pollution. For us, a lot of it is pollution that's coming through the Banning Pass from the Los Angeles area. But in addition to smoke and dust and dirt and soot and salt, we also have a ton of sand in our atmosphere when we have the strong winds that we have here in the desert. And here's the thing about air pollution. When air pollution exists, cities with high pollution see much higher mortality rates when they have pandemics. And that's one of the reasons why we see in our current pandemic disadvantaged communities being hit so hard. This is just through June 23rd. And you can see that U.S. COVID deaths are much, much higher for Black Americans, twice that of white Americans. The death rate for Black Americans aged 35 to 44 is 10 times higher than for white folks of the same age. Indigenous communities are getting slammed by COVID. The highest per capita rate of COVID-19 infection in the U.S. is in the Navajo Nation. New Mexico nearly as high, although to their credit, they have taken dramatic steps to try to slow and stop the spread of the pandemic there, in some ways much better than other parts of the United States. And so climate change is also a medical emergency, and that's also something that our scientists and our physicians have been telling us for a long, long time. Now, another issue, obviously, that affects us here in the Coachella Valley is California's hotter future. We're predicted to get hotter and hotter and hotter, and those of us who live here can already see these effects here in the Coachella Valley. According to the California Climate Change Assessment, extreme drought and extreme wet events will become more common, increasing the risk of flash flooding and wildfire. And the romantics among you, I'm sure, will remember Valentine's Day last year. This is a shot near Frank Sinatra Drive, where the wash here in the valley turned into the Mississippi River for a day or two. And of course, we're seeing more fires in the foothills around the Coachella Valley. This is just above Bob Hope's house, I want to say about 2 months ago. So I've only touched on a couple of the ways that climate change affects us, but of course, at the top of the list is that it's the number one threat to the global economy. And so must we change? I think we could all probably collectively say yes. And so the next question is, can we change? And this is where the news gets a little bit better. In 1936, the New York Times said a rocket will never be able to leave the Earth's atmosphere. And yet, here's this footprint from the moon. So obviously, when we put our minds to something, we can make significant technological change, and we can do it very quickly. All of the solutions that we need, we have right now. We don't have to invent anything new. So let's first talk about coal plants. The current presidential administration made a big deal out of restoring coal jobs during the last election, and they're still talking about it. But the truth is, U.S. coal is dying, and almost dead. Here's a shot of proposed and defeated coal plants between 2005 and 2017. Here's the ones that have been retired in that period. Here's the ones whose retirement has been announced. So coal is pretty much being slowly canceled. In its place come green energy progress. And so let's look at wind first. 2000, we said wind capacity would reach 30 gigawatts by 2010. We beat that goal by 22 times over. As you can see, this little line going straight up, global wind energy capacity continues to increase. And as you've probably heard before, our global wind could supply worldwide consumption 40 times over if we put our minds to it. Let's talk about solar. 2002, 1 gigawatt per year by 2010. We beat that goal by 17%, and now it's been beaten by 121%. Another shot of how fast those installations have gone up. One of the big arguments about solar was, gosh, it's too expensive, those solar cell modules, and obviously, as you can see, since 1976, that cost has come way down to make it on par with other forms of energy. So we can take things like solar into remote places and sort of jump technology and give people who've never had power before almost instant electricity. Let's look at Chile. They decided to take solar really seriously. Here's what happened with them. And there you have it. Growth, growth, and growth. So when candidates for the presidency like Joe Biden talk about the ability to create new well-paying energy jobs, this is what he's talking about. If we really put money into the infrastructure of renewable energy, lots and lots of people are going to get jobs. Of course, solar would give us enough power to power the whole Earth for a full year every hour. Storage capacity continues to go up. That's been a thing in terms of research and development. This is also going to be a thing that's going to affect a possible solution to the Salton Sea, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Automobile manufacturers are obviously increasing the autos that they build that are powered by electricity. And there have actually been some talk about solutions here in the Coachella Valley. I've talked about the possibility of a forthcoming Salton Sea agreement. Now, people have been making promises about the Salton Sea for years and years and years, and they have never really followed through on those promises. But right now there's a possibility of finally finding an affordable way to increase geothermal power and also extract green lithium from the area around the south part of the Salton Sea. That may bring in fresh water, or I should say salt water, from places like the Gulf of Mexico, where it would be desalinated and used in these geothermal power and extraction processes, and then the water left over would be put back into the Salton Sea. Organizations like the Salton Sea Authority, working really hard to make that happen, they're a group that has brought together a number of different interested parties at the state and local level to try and find solutions to to this evaporation of water in the Salton Sea, which leads to open playas where all of that agricultural runoff, dirt, and dust at the bottom starts coming up in the air and giving everybody asthma. Our own energy company here in the valley is talking about increasing their battery storage capability. Artists around the valley regularly try to raise public awareness about climate change through things like Desert X. And of course, we're no slouches when it comes to being leaders in solar and wind power here in the valley. Organizations like Sunnylands have green visions where they're trying to use their resources, in this case their 200-acre estate, as a living laboratory to test sustainable environmental practices. We're very proud of our emissions-free buses here. And one of the really interesting solutions that we're trying is this thing called the CV Link, which is a 50-mile alternative transportation corridor for bicycles, pedestrians, and low-speed electric vehicles through the Coachella Valley. And so can we change? Again, the obvious answer is of course we can. All we need is the political will to change. And so that brings us to the last question, which of course is, will we change? Well, in 2015, we came to a historic agreement with every nation in the world. We agreed to work together to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by mid-century. Now, the current political administration in the United States has stated they want to pull out of that agreement because they don't think it's a good enough deal. But the truth is they can't legally do so until the day after the 2020 presidential election. And of course, we have something to say about that. In spite of the fact that our current president pulled out of the agreement, a number of states got together and formed the United States Climate Alliance, which represents about 55% of the American people, so they could all together move forward on the kinds of steps that were called for in the Paris Agreement. World religions everywhere have said that human-induced climate change is not only a scientific reality, but fixing it is a moral and religious imperative for humanity. I can't think of one major world religion that has not made that statement. And of course, indigenous people have taken up the cause because they have seen what has been happening to their mother and father Earth. We've already seen here in the United States the power of indigenous folks to rise up and protest has led to the cancellation of at least 2 large pipeline projects. Our own denomination, the Unitarian Universalist Association, has been working for years to engage congregations in this work of talking more about climate change. And more people have come to think what I think, that nature is my religion, that Earth is my temple. I know a lot of you think this. I meet people every day who have found their spiritual place in nature. And of course, we're not alone. These protests were in 2017, but even the current protests right up until today about racial justice are also about climate change and climate justice. Excuse me. And so what we need to do as as citizens, as people here on the planet, is use our voices wherever we can, is use our vote and encourage others to do so, and use the choices we make in our personal lives to fight this climate crisis. Our world obviously depends on it. This is a picture of me that a friend took on one of our trips to the Salton Sea. I'd wanted to go down to the water's edge to get a close photo, and she took this from the car. I love this picture. It reminds me how small I am, how small we all are, and how I'm directly connected to something so much bigger, our planet home and the universe we reside in. This is a picture of me taking a photo, but it's really a picture of me in deep contemplative prayer in one of the grandest cathedrals on earth. Now, God knows I'm not the only one who feels this way, the only one with passion for the earth. And so, ladies and gentlemen, Vice President Al Gore.
I remember vividly when the civil rights movement first began to pick up steam. We saw Bull Connor turning fire hoses on young African American kids, and we asked the older generation why it's just and fair to have laws that discriminate on the basis of skin color. And when they couldn't answer that question, the laws began to change. This movement to solve the climate crisis is in the tradition of every great moral movement that has advanced the cause of humankind. And every single one of them has met with resistance to the point where many of the advocates felt despair and wondered, how long is this going to take? Martin Luther King famously answered a question during some of the bleakest hours of the civil rights movement when someone asked, how long is this going to take? He said, how long? Not long, because no lie can live forever. How long? Not long, because the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. How long? Not long. We are close in this movement. We are very close to the tipping point beyond which this movement, like the abolition movement, like the women's suffrage movement, like the civil rights movement, like the anti-apartheid movement, like the movement for gay rights, is resolved into a choice between right and wrong. And because of who we are as human beings, the outcome is foreordained. And it is right to save the future for humanity. It is wrong to pollute this earth and destroy the climate balance. It is right to give hope to the future generation. It will not be easy. And we too, in this movement, will encounter a series of no's. The great American poet Wallace Stevens in the last century, one of his lines was this: after the last no comes a yes. And on that yes, the future world depends.
This is a photo you saw earlier. It's a shot of the Coachella Valley that I took from the lookout up on Highway 74. We live in an incredibly beautiful place. It's why Tim and I moved here 3 years ago. Like our entire planet home, like humanity even, it is worth saving. And I know you must feel tired. I know I sure do. If climate change were the only issue before us, that would be tough enough. But we also have unprecedented political chaos, a once every 100 years pandemic, a crisis and an opportunity to face up to racial justice, economic uncertainty, joblessness, nearly a Great Depression. And as if that weren't enough, there's the fear and anxiety and grief that each of us feels, that everyone around us feels. That would make anyone tired. I love this quote from Brooke Hampton. No, we don't need more sleep. It's our souls that are tired, not our bodies. We need nature. We need magic. We need adventure. We need freedom. We need truth. We need stillness. We don't need more sleep. We need to wake up and live. I want to finish this morning by asking you to do the impossible, to renew again the UU principles that our church stands for and to fight for them. It's time for the chaos to stop. It's time to take back our humanity. It's time to dream and love and live again. Vote, volunteer, remember your power, do whatever it takes. You have overcome tough odds before. Dig deep, do it again. Stand together, stand for something, stand tall, stand up, stand strong. I promise I will stand with you. In and through the Spirit of life and in your many holy names we pray. Amen. I now invite you to join us in our closing hymn, followed by the extinguishing of our chalice.